In the year 1992, an Indian American girl was born in Santa Clara, California. Me. Throughout my childhood, I was very loved and very supported by my parents. They raised me with the concept that this would always be how things were and that they would always protect me. Also in the year 1992, a 4-year-old Indian American girl by the name of Sia, who lived just 100 miles away from where I was born, was raped by her uncle. This was the first time Sia had been raped by her uncle, but it wasn't the last. Every night for the next 8 years until she was 12, Sia experienced the same abuse. Throughout her teenage years, Sia never mentioned this abuse to anyone because she didn't want to unnecessarily create conflict in her family. But she did believe that if she was ever to tell this story to her parents, they would be right there by her side and they would support her and protect her if she ever wanted to put her uncle behind bars. When Sia finally told her parents, however, they didn't believe her. And 2 years later, they told her to keep silent, believing that it was of utmost importance to protect their reputation in the community. Today, Sia is 24 years old, and her abuser still lives in her childhood home. I've been very privileged in my life, in a number of ways. But most importantly, I've always had the love and support of my parents when I needed them. I've also been privileged never to have experienced what Sia experienced. But her story does bring up a couple of very important questions. If I had experienced sexual abuse as a child, would my parents have supported me as I would have expected? Or would they have silenced me when I needed their help? My experiences and Sia's bring me to my two main thinking points. First, I wanted to know whether Sia and I, both South Asian American women, were alone among other South Asian Americans in expecting this sort of parental support in these kinds of situations. South Asian Americans are immigrants or children, grandchildren, etc., of immigrants who hail from these countries, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. I will be using this term frequently in my presentation. To answer this question, I conducted a survey of 108 South Asian American Stanford students to kind of get an idea of what perceptions of sexuality and child sexual abuse were among this group on campus. My study showed that of the students I asked, 92% had never participated in any sort of active discussion about sexuality with their parents. Interestingly, however, 83% believed that if they were to participate in such a discussion, their parents would also participate very willingly. I then described to them Sia's situation and asked them if they were placed in a similar predicament, would their parents support them? 100% of the students responded that yes, their parents would unequivocally be on their side and take the necessary action that these students wanted. But wait, do you see a little bit of a conflict here? 100% of students believed that their parents would support them in taking action. Sia believed that too. But in her case, her parents did not support her the way that she expected. This led me to my second question. How would the parents of these 108 students actually react? Or what were potential reactions that they could have in reality? Alan Schwartz, a PhD and practicing clinician, says that he has experienced many cases in which his patients clearly recall not only their abuse, but the fact that their parents offered no safety. Their parents denied their child's experiences, just as Sia's did. Partially, maybe because they felt that their child's abuse was a result of their oversight or parental neglect. Thus, parental denial became a defense mechanism. Then, in cases where parents did believe their children, sometimes they didn't report the cases of abuse to the authorities. This is a particular point at which South Asian Americans were researched to have been different from other ethnicities studied. Kanu Kolu and Mahalingam, researchers from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, show how the model minority myth may impact how South Asian Americans see themselves in America. This concept of the model minority myth shows that South Asians are stereotyped as typically experiencing great successes and very few problems. In a sense, this comes from a commitment to family and community harmony. It's a bit of a cycle. The model minority myth is perpetuated when these families strive to live up to the expectations of their societies in the name of community harmony. But it's also caused when families do not reveal their issues to the exterior world, and so the world doesn't see that there are internal problems lying there. Usually, South Asian Americans prefer to keep their problems inside. There's a bit of an insider-outsider barrier, and the home setting is where sensitive situations are normally hashed out. So this is the bottom line then, the critical conflict. South Asian American children and adolescents overwhelmingly expect parental support in most situations, but definitely in cases such as those of serious sexual abuse. But when it comes down to it, that support might be very difficult to come by. But although it may be a little bit impossible to force parents to believe their children or to report abuse when they hear of it without infringing on cultural belief systems, it is definitely possible to bridge the dialogue in finding a way for victims of sexual abuse to meet with outsiders and find outside resources to help them understand their situations. Here's where I'd like to make a lasting impact. Because I can't personally avenge every victimized South Asian American student, I'd like to research how existing models of community do actually work and implement them in my very own three-pronged approach to this problem. Prong number one, catering to calls for help. Supriya Misra is a volunteer at the South Asian Women's Organization, NARCA, in Berkeley, and is also a Stanford alum. When I interviewed Supriya, I learned about NARCA's primary and most impactful service, their helpline. All NARCA volunteers who work on this helpline are required to be trained in dealing with domestic violence and grief. And over the years, NARCA has developed a directory of resources that provide their clients with access to housing, legal, and medical resources within the Bay Area. Additionally, because the majority of the women who call into NARCA's helpline are abused by their spouses or partners, it's very important for NARCA volunteers to make sure that they call their clients back only during pre-designated safe hours. Lastly, because NARCA volunteers are all South Asian themselves, they are able to speak with clients in their native languages, which helps eliminate a little bit of this outsider-insider barrier. In creating a helpline that specifically serves South Asian American victims of child sexual abuse, it's important to learn from a lot of these models that NARCA uses. There is still a little bit of a gap, though, in the NARCA model, and that comes from it not specifically relating to child sexual abuse. Luckily, however, there are existing programs within the Bay Area that treat psychologists and volunteers on how to deal with child sexual abuse. And implementing those in a helpline model would be able to provide direct access for victims of child sexual abuse who have access to phones. Prong two, utilizing the interwebs. Okay, my second prong is a website. Because I'm looking at a population that is my age or younger, you can usually expect this population to be pretty tech savvy. I was actually really surprised because when I did a very brief Google search just to find why does my uncle come into my room every night, something that realistically a 10-year-old Sia could have searched herself, the very first result was a Woody Allen stand-up comedy site. And the remainder of the results on the first page were simply stories of people asking for help without much of a response. In our world today, this strikes me as a little bit absurd. Thus, I'd like to create a website that has high search engine optimization, SEO, or Google juice, that will allow children with questions to find answers when they need them. Additionally, this website would have local resources, customized geographically, so that people would be able to find the same sort of resources that NARCA offers, but within their area. Lastly, the most important feature of this website would be a live help chat. Similar to the helpline that NARCA offers, this help chat would provide the same basic functionality of a helpline, but it would also, it would provide a sort of interface between a computer so that students have a barrier between them, between them and someone on the other end of the line if a phone call may seem too probing and may make the situation seem too real. Lastly, we'd want to start early with prevention. Prevention is extremely early with child sexual abuse because the Bureau of Justice has a statistic that shows that a majority of child sexual abuse begins at age 4 or a little bit older. Because these children don't know what sex is, because they barely learn how to speak, helplines and websites are of little use. Thus, an awareness model that teaches children what is acceptable and what should cause concern, and also an educate the educator model, which will teach teachers, doctors, and counselors how to interact with children when they approach them with problems, would be the best way to approach the awareness situation. You may wonder what the South Asian American factor is in all this, but at that young of an age, culture isn't such a huge difference, but other resources may not be as effective. That's why, together, these 3 resources produce a trident of resources for justice. There needs to be a second line of defense. At the end of the day, the only thing that may truly resolve this situation is a cultural openness between South Asian and American cultures. But we can provide a place to start. By utilizing the resources that we've created and just jumping into the pool, taking the leap of faith, we can only hope that our resources will be effective in providing help for this population. One call is all we need. Thank you.